Good evening, and welcome to Hello, It's Us, a program based on the principle that life in general goes better if it's all of us working together, as opposed to you, me, and them all working at cross purposes. Hello, It's Us is brought to you through a collaboration between the Center for Disabilities and Development, the Extended Dream Foundation, and all the folks here at Public Access Television, Channel 18. I'm Terry Cunningham, your co-host. As always, on my far left, Mr. Keith Ruff. And with us tonight is our friend Joe Brisben. And we've decided that we're going to do a tribute to Pete Seeger tonight and talk about Pete some, and Joe's going to sing some of his songs. And Pete Seeger's a pretty amazing guy. He died about a month ago at the age of 94. And everybody probably knows a dozen or more songs that Pete wrote through the years, but you probably would never attribute them to him. So we'll discover some of those. And I want to read a little from his obituary to start us off. Pete Seeger, champion of folk music and social change, dies at 94. Pete Seeger, the singer, folk song collector, and songwriter who spearheaded an American folk revival and spent a long career championing folk music as both a vital heritage and a catalyst for social change, died on Monday in Manhattan. He was 94. His death at New York Presbyterian Hospital was confirmed by his grandson, Kidma Cahill Jackson. Mr. Seeger's career carried him from singing at labor rallies to the top 10, from college auditoriums to folk festivals, and from a conviction for contempt of Congress after defying the House Un-American Activities Committee in the 1950s, to performing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial at an inaugural concert for Barack Obama. For Mr. Seeger, folk music and a sense of community were inseparable. And where he saw a community, he saw the possibility of political action. In his hearty tenor, Mr. Seeger, a beanpole of a man who most often played 12-string guitar or 5-string banjo, sang topical songs and children's songs, humorous tunes and earnest anthems, always encouraging listeners to join in. His agenda paralleled the concerns of the American left. He sang for the labor movement in the 1940s and 50s, for civil rights marches and anti-Vietnam rallies in the 60s, and environmental and anti-war songs, anti-war causes in the 70s and beyond. We Shall Overcome, which Mr. Seeger adapted from old spirituals, became a civil rights anthem. Mr. Seeger was a prime mover in a folk revival that transformed popular music in the 1950s. As a member of the Weavers, he sang hits including Lead Belly's Good Night Irene, which reached number 1, and If I Had a Hammer, which he wrote with the group's Lee Hayes. Another of Mr. Seeger's songs, Where Have All the Flowers Gone, became an anti-war standard, and in 1965, the Byrds had a number 1 hit with a folk song version of Turn, 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 Mr. Seeger's setting of a passage from the book of Ecclesiastes. Now I know that everybody probably has heard of all those songs, but probably didn't know Pete did them. You want to do a couple songs for us now, Joe?
Okay. I was in grade school when the Weavers were really at their peak, and the first song that I remember them doing was this. On top of Old Smoky, all covered with snow, I lost my true lover for courting too slow, for courting's a pleasure and parting is grief, and a false-hearted lover is worse than a thief. For a thief he will rob you and take what you have, but a false-hearted lover will lead you to the grave, and the grave will decay you and turn you to dust. Not one boy in 100 a poor girl can trust. They'll hug you and kiss you and tell you more lies than cross ties on a railroad or stars in the skies. So come all you young maidens and listen to me. Don't hang your affections on a green willow tree, for the trees will decay you and the roots they will die, and we'll all be forsaken and never know why. Thank you.
Nice one. A generation's mentor. Mr. Seeger was a mentor to younger folks and topical singers in the 50s and 60s. Among them, Bob Dylan, Don McLean, Bernice Johnson Reagan, who founded Sweet Honey in the Rock decades later. Bruce Springsteen drew from Mr. Seeger's repertoire of traditional music about a turbulent America in recording his 2006 album, We Shall Overcome, the Seeger Sessions, and in 2009 he performed Woody Guthrie's This Land Is Your Land with Mr. Seeger at the Obama inaugural. At a Madison Square Garden concert celebrating Mr. Seeger's 90th birthday, Mr. Springsteen introduced him as a living archive of American music and conscience, a testament of the power of song and culture to nudge history along. Although he recorded dozens of albums, Mr. Seeger distrusted commercialism and was never comfortable with the idea of stardom. He invariably tried to use his celebrity to bring attention and contributions to the causes that moved him or in the traditional songs he wanted to preserve. Mr. Seeger saw himself as part of a continuing folk tradition, constantly recycling and revising music that had been honed by time. During the McCarthy era, Mr. Seeger's political affiliations, including membership in the Communist Party in the 1940s, led to his being blacklisted and later indicted for contempt of Congress. The pressure broke up the Weavers, and Mr. Seeger disappeared from commercial television until the late 60s. But he never stopped recording and performing and listening to songs from ordinary people. Through the decades, his songs have become part of the America's folklore. My job, he said in 2009, is to show folks there's a lot of good music in this world, and if used right, it may help to save the planet. Pete Seeger was born in Manhattan on May 3, 1919, to Charles Seeger, a musicologist, and Constance de Cleaver Edson Seeger, wow, a concert violinist whose parents later divorced. Ready for another one?
Yeah. You know, you mentioned that Pete didn't do many things for money. Most of the recordings he made were for Moses Ash at Folkways Records. But he did briefly have a contract with Columbia Records in the late 50s and early 60s. And I think he made those recordings and made that money off Columbia so he could pay for his legal bills and defending himself against the against the House Un-American Activities Committee. One of the things that I really admired about Pete was he preserved a lot of songs from the Depression.
Yes.
And here's a song that I remember him doing, where migrant workers out in California from Oklahoma, and I'm a native of Enid, Oklahoma, so this is pretty close to me. And they would do this song, and kids would go through this cycle every day, and they'd come home, and all they could eat was sweet potatoes. Here we are, all cooked sweet potatoes, sweet potatoes, sweet potatoes. Here we are, all eating sweet potatoes. Eat 'em right straight up. When we wake up in the morning, in the morning, in the morning. When we wake up in the morning, gotta get out of bed. Soon as the school bus comes down the highway, down the highway, down the highway. When the school bus comes down the highway, gotta go to school. Soon as the school bell rings in the afternoon, in the afternoon, in the afternoon. When the school bell rings in the afternoon, gotta go straight home. Soon as we all eat sweet potatoes, sweet potatoes, sweet potatoes. Soon as we all eat sweet potatoes, gotta go to bed. Soon as we go to bed in the evening, in the evening, in the evening. Soon as we all go to bed, gotta go to sleep.
That was
Another goodie.
Yeah. He had a very good grasp on what the country was like at that time.
Yeah, sure did.
Okay. He began playing the ukulele while attending Avon Old Farms, a private boarding school in Connecticut. His father and stepmother, the composer Ruth Crawford Seeger, collected and transcribed rural American folk music, as did folklorists like John and Alan Lomax. He heard the five-string banjo, which would become his main instrument, when his father took him to a square dance festival in North Carolina. Young Pete became enthralled by rural traditions. I liked the strident vocal tone of the singers, the vigorous dancing, he is quoted as saying, and How Can I Keep From Singing, a biography by Dave Dunaway. The words of the songs had all the meat of life in him. Their humor had a bite, it was not trivial. Their tragedy was real and not sentimental. Planning to be a journalist, Mr. Seeger attended Harvard, where he founded a radical newspaper and joined the Young Communist League. After 2 years, he dropped out and went to New York City, where Alan Lomax introduced him to the blues singer Huddy Ledbetter, known as Leadbelly. Lomax also helped Mr. Seeger find a job cataloging and transcribing music at the Archive of American Folk Song at the Library of Congress. Mr. Seeger met Guthrie, a songwriter who shared his love of vernacular music and agitprop ambitions in 1940 when they performed at a benefit concert for migrant California workers. Traveling across the United States, with with Guthrie. Mr. Seeger picked up some of his style. He also hitchhiked and hopped freight trains by himself, learning and trading songs. When he returned to New York later in 1940, Mr. Seeger made his first albums. He, Millard Lampell, and Hayes founded the Almanac Singers, who performed Union songs and, until Germany invaded the Soviet Union, anti-war songs. Following the Communist Party line, Guthrie soon joined the group. During World War II, the Almanac Singers' repertoire turned to patriotic, anti-fascist songs, bringing them to a broad audience, including a primetime national radio spot. But the Singers' earlier anti-war songs, the target of the FBI investigations, came to light, and the group's career plummeted.
Well, one of the songs that Pete and Woody and the Almanac Singers used to do was Union Maid. There once was a Union maid who never was afraid of the goons and the ginks and the company finks and the deputy sheriffs who made the raid. Went to the Union Hall when a meeting it was called, and the company boys they came around. She always stood her ground. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union till the day I die. This Union maid was wise to the tricks of the company spies. She'd always organize the guys when we got her way, when she argued for higher pay. When the company came around, she always stood her ground. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking to the Union. I'm sticking to the Union till the day I die.
I remember that song.
Yeah.
Not when it was originally played, but I remember it. Before the group completely disbanded, however, Mr. Seeger was drafted in 1942 and assigned to a unit of performers. He married Tushi Aline Uta while on furlough in 1943. She would become essential to his work. He called her the brains of the family. When he returned from the war, he founded People's Songs, Inc., which published political songs and presented concerts for several years before going bankrupt. He also started his nightclub career, performing at the Village Vanguard in Greenwich Village. Mr. Seeger and Paul Robeson toured with the campaign of Henry Wallace. Ooh, a good Iowegian.
Yes.
The Progressive Party presidential candidate in 1948. Mr. Seeger invested $1,700 in 17 acres of land overlooking the Hudson River in Beacon, New York, and began building a log cabin there in the late 40s. He lived in Beacon for the rest of his life. In 1940, Mr. Seeger, Hayes, Ronnie Gilbert, and Fred Hellerman started working together as the Weavers. They were signed to Decca Records by Gordon Jenkins, who was the company's music director and an arranger for Frank Sinatra. With Jenkins' elaborate orchestral arrangements, the group recorded a repertoire that stretched from If I Had a Hammer and a South African song, Wimmiwo. Wimmiwo. Okay.
Yeah.
The title was Mr. Seeger's mishearing of Mboob. The name of the South African hit by Solomon Linda to an Israeli soldier's song, Tenza, 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 and a cleaned up version of Lead Belly's Good Night, Irene. On stage, they also sang more topical songs. Okay.
Irene, good night. Irene, good night. Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dreams. Sometimes I live in the country. Sometimes I live in town. Sometimes I take a great notion to jump into the river and drown. Irene, good night. Irene, good night. Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dreams. I love Irene, God knows I do. Love her till the seas run dry. If Irene turns her back on me, I'm gonna drink cocaine and die. Irene, good night. Irene, good night. Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dreams. Stop rambling. Stop that gambling. Stop staying out late at night. Go home to your wife and family and stay by the fireside bright. Irene, good night. Irene, good night. Good night, Irene. Good night, Irene. I'll see you in my dreams.
Very good, Joe.
Thank you.
Joe, now, did he write that song or did he just?
He got that song from Red Belly.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
It is a goodie, though.
It is.
1950 and 1951, the Weavers were national stars and hit singles and engagements at major nightclubs. Their hits included Kisses Sweeter Than Wine, Guthrie's So Long It's Been Good to Know Ya, and they sold an estimated 4 million singles and albums. That was a hell of a lot of
That was a
stuff
lot
for
of
back
records
then.
back in those days.
Wow, for somebody who didn't get rich. Their commercial success was dampened, however, when Red Channels, an influential pamphlet that named performers with suspected communist ties, appeared in June 1950 and listed Mr. Seeger. Although by then he had quit the Communist Party, he later criticized himself for not having left the party sooner, though he continued to describe himself as a communist with a little c. By the summer of 1951, the Red Channel citation and leaks from the FBI files had led to the cancellation of television appearances. In 1951, the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee investigated the Weavers for sedition, and in February 1952, a former member of People's Songs testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee that 3 of the 4 Weavers were members of the Communist Party. As engagements dried up and the Weavers disbanded, though they reunited occasionally in the mid-50s, after the group recorded an advertisement for Lucky Strike cigarettes, Mr. Seeger left, citing his objection to promoting tobacco use. Shut out of national exposure, Mr. Seeger returned primarily to solo concerts, touring college coffee houses, churches, schools, and summer camps, building an audience for folk music among young people. He started to write a long-running column for the folk song magazine Sing Out, and he recorded prolifically for the independent Folkways label, singing everything from children's songs to Spanish Civil War anthems. In 1955, he was subpoenaed by the House Un-American Activities Committee. In his testimony, he said, "I feel that my whole life I have never done anything of any conspiratorial nature." He also stated, tried to tie myself up there. I'm not going to answer any question as to my association, my philosophical or religious beliefs, or my political beliefs, or how I voted in any election, or any of these private affairs. I think these are very improper questions for any American to be asked, especially under such compulsion as this. Mr. Seeger offered to sing the songs mentioned by the congressman who questioned him. The committee declined. Mr. Seeger was indicted in 1957 on 10 counts of contempt of Congress. He was convicted in 1961 and sentenced to a year in prison, but the next year an appeals court dismissed the indictment as faulty. After the indictment, Mr. Seeger's concerts were often picketed by the John Birch Society and other righteous groups. Rightist.
I can imagine that this is probably one of the songs that Pete would have loved to have sung to the House Un-American Activities.
Yes.
Well, I've sung this song, and I'll sing it again, about the people I've met and the places I've been, in the town of Pampa, in the county called Clay. Here's what all of the people there say, singing so long. It's been good to know you so long. It's been good to know you so long. It's been good to know you. This dusty old dust is a-getting my home, and I've gotta be drifting along. Well, the dust storm hit, and it hit like thunder. It dusted us over, and it dusted us under. Stopped all the traffic, blocked out the sun. So to their homes all the people did run, singing so long. It's been good to know you so long. It's been good to know you so long. It's been good to know you. This dusty old dust is a-getting my home, and I've gotta be drifting along. Those sweethearts, they sat in the dark and they sparked. They hugged and they kissed in that dirty old dark. They sighed and they cried and they hugged and they kissed. But instead of marriage, they were talking like this. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. So long, it's been good to know you. This dust, the old dust is a-getting my home, and I've gotta be drifting along. Well, the telephone rang, and it rang off the wall. It was the preacher making a call. He said, kind friends, this is the end. Last chance to have salvation from sin. Well, the church was packed from the front to the back in that dusty old dust storm blew so black. The preacher could not read the word of his text, so he folded his specs and took up a collection, singing so long. It's been good to know you so long. It's been good to know you so long. It's been good to know you. This dusty old dust is a-getting my home, and I've gotta be drifting along. Thanks.
Another oldie goldie.
Yep.
By then, the folk revival was prospering. In 1959, Mr. Seeger was among the founders of the Newport Folk Festival, The Kingston Trio's version of Mr. Seeger's Where Have All the Flowers Gone reached the top 40 in 1962, soon followed by Peter, Paul, and Mary's version If I Had a Hammer, which rose to the top 10. Mr. Seeger was signed to a major label, Columbia Records, in 1961, but he remained unwelcome on TV or on network television. Hootenanny, an early 1960s show on ABC that capitalized on folk revival, refused to book Mr. Seeger, causing other performers, including Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Peter, Paul, and Mary, to boycott it. Hootenanny eventually offered to present Mr. Seeger if he would sign a loyalty oath. He refused. He toured the world performing and collecting folk songs. In 1963, and returned to serenade civil rights advocates who had made a rallying song of his, We Shall Overcome. Like many of Seeger's songs, We Shall Overcome had convoluted traditional roots. It was based on old gospel songs, primarily All Overcome, a hymn that striking tobacco workers had sung on a picket line in South Carolina. A slower version, We Will Overcome, was collected from Lucille Simmons, one of the workers, by Zilphia Horton, the musical director of the Highlander Folk School in Monteagle, Tennessee, which trained union organizers.